Thank you for visiting this lecture. If you are here, I hope it is because you share my belief in the essential value of informational graphics to a news organization. Today, we are going to look at the thinking behind several entry-level infographics devices, hoping these insights inspire us to produce more sustainable graphics for our newspaper, the Vaughn College Vanguard. What are informational graphics exactly? As the phrase implies, they are graphic art elements that bring informational value to a news story. Newspapers have been using them for generations, and they range from the simplest of locator maps to the most elaborate of visual renderings. Graphics artists produce them via a number of software programs, the most popular of which is Adobe Illustrator. What is the purpose of infographics? As a mentor of mine once suggested, their primary value lies in orienting the reader in time, place, and detail. They offer value-added content to a narrative better told visually than by words. Astute newspaper editors also suggest they offer alternative entry points to a story. Traditionally, most readers were drawn first to pictures, then headlines, and finally text. If either of the first two were not compelling, the reader would not bother investing considerably more time in the words. Would a narrative about flight or an illustration of it have done better justice to the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers, as shown here? Infographics, when done correctly, illustrate locations or relationships between, say, data or people, how things happened or why they didn't. Almost anything you can imagine writing as a reporter can be told in an infographic, which is why they are so useful. Infographics can take on a number of forms, but the most common are vector graphics, vector being a fancy way of saying linear or two-dimensional, and three-dimensional graphics. Vector graphics are commonly a part of print publications, where three-dimensional graphics add an element of presentation to websites. That said, regardless of form, infographics can range from the simplest to the most sophisticated designs. Because this is a beginner's class, let's start with our most basic infographic element, the locator map, and move on to other common graphic devices. Take a look at these small maps. They are from two communities on Long Island where my newspaper, Newsday, circulates. What do they tell us? First, of course, where the communities are, but also where they sit on the 120-mile landscape of Long Island. From where or what do you think locator maps draw their source material? That is, how do locators find the information needed to locate? From map sources, of course, including Google Maps, Google Earth, etc. Addresses or GPS coordinates are entered into a mapping program and a location is spit out. But what if the area does not have an easily locatable address, such as a battlefield or the site of a plane crash? That's when graphics editors must work with reporters to flesh out all the essential information necessary to build the map. Another common graphic device is simply called a chart, but there is more variety than you might imagine in that five-letter word. There are bar charts, pie charts, fever charts, and more, each used by graphics teams to illustrate different relationships. Let's start with a bar chart. If one wants to compare data from a single entity over time, or even parallel entities, often the best way to do so is via a bar chart, where scalable data are used to produce bars whose lengths can be visually compared. Note use of the word scalable. Data that lack an approximate relationship produce a bar chart that frankly looks silly. Does comparing the net worths of a high school teacher, for example, with Amazon founder Jeff Bezos make sense for obvious reasons? But comparing the net worths of a high school teacher and a local fireman probably does. Likewise, comparing the net worths of Bezos with Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg probably will produce a worthwhile bar chart. We say probably because we don't know until we plot the data. A pie chart is a circular representation of parts of a whole. Like a pie is divided into slices, data are carved up inside the whole to yield a percentage of the whole. It's a simple and effective way of illustrating the relationships between subsets. Does that prompt you into a logical observation about pie charts you might not have considered previously? It ought to. You need a full 100% data set to produce a pie chart. If you have only data totaling, say, 90%, all relationships to the whole are distorted. In the example here, the pie charts on the left represent the demographic breakdown of the Catholic Church's College of Cardinals, who vote on the Pope. If we had less than 100% data on the Cardinals' countries of origin, a pie would have created a misleading illustration. A fever chart, or fever line, is a graphical representation of changes in a variable over time. They are sometimes called time series charts and are ideal for illustrating data that change continuously, like stock prices. Looking at the chart here, you see a very dramatic illustration of the rise in value of Amazon's stock price from 1997 to 2017. It's called a fever chart, by the way, because it mirrors the way hospitals illustrate the changes in a patient's vital signs during his or her stay. There is one inherent problem in fever charts, however. Financial data not properly indexed for inflation can present an unrealistic view of real appreciation or depreciation. The Amazon data here are not indexed, but that's less of an issue since we are only charting growth over 20 years. Another commonly used graphic device is a flowchart. This is the most fundamental graphic used to show relationships between people. We have all seen family trees. They are the very basic of flowcharts. The one at the left is a flowchart I designed as a way of introducing students to chains of command in a newsroom. You see how it flows simply from the top down. If you've seen the movie The Post, you'll recall how publisher Katharine Graham had to explain all of her decision-making to those below her. That is the model here. Next week, we are going to consider more detail-oriented graphics, including renderings and illustrations. I wanted to leave you with a few of these from my experience at Newsday. Some of these are heavily sophisticated and required nuanced work with reporters, software, and more. Don't get overwhelmed by the details. Look at what the graphics are trying to illustrate. For example, the map of the failed rescue mission in Afghanistan is one of my favorite pieces of work in my 25-year career. But it began with an idea for a simple locator map, which it is, but of course a whole lot more. Like all good journalism, infographics tell us how things happened, where and when they happened, why they happened, and who they happened to. They offer the remarkable advantage of showing readers the 5 W's and the H. The more we embrace this storytelling medium, the more we fulfill our responsibility as the campus's newspaper of record. Until next week then, thanks for watching, and as always, cherish the First Amendment.